The winter came early that year, sweeping down from the Bitterroot Mountains with a violence that shook even the hardiest of men. The town of Dry Pine shrank beneath the snow, doors barred and chimneys coughing out black smoke. But 20 miles from its edge, deeper than roads dared stretch, a man named Eli Brand worked the forest like it owed him blood. He lived in a shack built of hand-felled pine, small and square with an iron stove that hissed when the logs were damp. No mirror, no clock, a dog named Sawtooth who never barked. He spoke only to trees, mostly with an axe. Eli was known to the townfolk by the timber he sold and the silence he carried. They said his wife died birthing a child that never cried, and he'd taken to the woods as if the soil itself might answer for it. No one saw him weep. No one dared ask. He came down once a month with a cart full of straight-grain red fur, a jug of home-brewed rye, and a scar on his cheek that hadn't been there the month before. It was on one of those trips, late October, air sharp as flint, that he found the girl. She wasn't much older than 20, wrapped in a threadbare coat too thin for the season, hair pulled tight into a braid as if neatness could undo what had been done. She sat in the back of the butcher's store beside a crate of pigskin gloves, her eyes flat and brown like creek silt. Eli wasn't looking to buy anything but whiskey and salt. But the butcher, a sour man named Clem Hess, stepped forward with a little smirk twitching at his lips. "You need company up there, Brand?" he asked, loud enough for the three others in the shop to hear. "Got myself a deal on hands." Eli's stare was blunt as a hammer. "Ain't hiring." "Not for chopping, for warming." Clem turned, thumbed toward the girl. "Belongs to my wife's people. Stepfather got drunk on poker, sold her to square the debt. Was gonna send her down to Missoula, but figured maybe a man like you." "I'm no whoremaster." "No, but you're alone." Clem folded his arms, eyes narrowing. "She's clean, quiet, don't eat much, and she'll do what she's told. You keep her for the winter, she won't make it halfway down the mountain anyhow. Best she gets is firewood and a roof." The girl didn't look up, didn't speak. She just sat there, hands folded like she was waiting to be named. Eli turned to leave. His coat collar was stiff with frost, boots soaked from the slush. He heard the girl's stepfather laugh outside, coins clinking in a tin. He didn't stop walking until the cart was loaded, until Sawtooth barked once and went silent again. Then he looked back. She was standing on the edge of the plank road now, small and stiff like a scarecrow. No bag, no gloves, just the coat and those eyes. He didn't speak to her, not when he tossed the old wool blanket toward the back of the cart, not when she climbed in without being asked. Not even when they passed the point where the snow grew deeper than a man's knees and all roads vanished into trees. Her name was Mara. She said it soft when he asked on the second day, beside a fire that spat more smoke than heat. He didn't ask more. For weeks they lived in the same house and never shared a word beyond necessity. She cooked when he brought meat. She swept the floor each morning like it meant something. At night she lay on a cot by the stove, silent as Sawtooth, who now slept at her feet. She never wept, never begged. But Eli noticed how she flinched when the wind rattled the shutters, how her hand curled around the knife handle even when she stirred stew. He knew the signs. He had seen it before in dying deer and wounded men, the eyes of something waiting to bolt. Then came the third week of December, when the wolves howled near and the creek froze stiff and the snow buried the outhouse. He came home late from a long haul, dragging a buck carcass through knee-high drift. When he pushed open the door, the fire was cold. The girl was gone. Sawtooth paced, ears back. Something wrong. Eli followed the tracks in the snow, but they vanished in a gust of wind. Night closed in like a trap. He called her name once, low and sharp, then again. Nothing. An hour later, he found her. She was barefoot in the snow, coat open, standing at the edge of the cliff behind the north ridge. It looked out across the pines to nothing but white sky. Her hair was loose now, whip-streaked across her face. When she turned to him, her lips were blue, but her eyes weren't scared. They were empty. I was going to jump, she said. He didn't answer. I thought I'd beat it to the punch, but it's colder than I thought. He stepped forward once, then again, close enough to smell the ash in her hair. You want me to jump? She asked. No, he said. Her lips cracked open like dried bark. Why not? He didn't answer then either, just took off his coat and wrapped it around her like laying a quilt over a broken limb. She didn't resist. She didn't thank him. She just cried, finally, and he didn't look away. After that night, the silence between them changed. He didn't ask her story, she didn't offer it, but she began humming when she worked. He started splitting wood closer to the house. She let her hair down at night and smiled at the dog. He caught her singing once. It stopped when she saw him, but the echo stayed in his ears for hours. Spring took longer than usual. The snow melted slow, then fast. Trees budded in green bruises. The creek roared again. And one morning she stepped out into the clearing and asked if she could plant something. Eli shrugged. Soil's not good here. I'll make it good. He didn't argue. She broke the ground behind the shack with her hands, bleeding at the knuckles. He brought her a spade the next day. She planted roots he didn't recognize, herbs that smelled bitter and sweet. Said her mother taught her the ways of plants before she died. By summer, the garden was a riot of color. The cabin smelled of thyme, and she boiled spruce tips into salves. She crushed seeds for tea. Eli's shoulder, stiff from years of swinging axe, softened. His cough eased. The dog's limp faded. Myra never bragged, just nodded once when he noticed. He still didn't touch her. Not out of restraint, out of fear. She was no longer just a girl left at the edge of a butcher's shop. She was something old and strange now, something stronger than sorrow. He saw it when she stood barefoot in the garden at dusk, humming to the bees. Something in her glowed. And deep down, he began to wonder what, exactly, he'd brought home that day. That wonder turned to suspicion when the boy came. His name was Isaiah, 12, maybe 13, covered in bruises and thick with dirt. He stumbled into the clearing mid-August, ribs showing and eyes wide. They said she was a witch, he gasped. They're coming, they want her dead. Eli looked at Mara. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She reached for her basket of dried herbs and poured hot tea into the boy's hands. Let them come, she said. And something in her voice made even the trees go quiet. They came at night, as boys do when turned to men too soon, faces covered, rifles raised, righteousness burning where sense used to live. 5 of them, riders from dry pine, shoulders squared like soldiers but hearts twisted by drought and superstition. Eli saw their torches before he heard their boots. Sawtooth was first to stand, teeth bared in the half-dark. The dog didn't bark, he never did, but his growl trembled the floorboards. Mara didn't ask what was happening. She tied her braid tight, packed Isaiah beneath the cot, and stepped outside without a word. Eli followed with the rifle he hadn't fired in 3 years. The lead rider was a boy named Nash Weller, son of the deacon, mouth too big for the soul behind it. His voice cracked when he spoke. She's marked, he said. That ain't just a woman you got up here, Brand. That's a witch. She healed your brother's fever, Mara said. She made it worse first, he snapped. Then she took it away. That ain't right. And the boy, he said you gave him dreams. Eli stepped forward. You came all this way to kill a dream. Don't be dumb, ain't just us. Dry Pine's got folks praying every night to keep her shadow off their children. This place. You ever been here before? Nash hesitated. You know this mountain, these woods, this land. Eli's voice was low but carried like wind through the trees. You know what she's done for it. She don't belong here. She belongs more than you ever will. The torchlight flickered. Behind the riders, one boy swallowed hard, another shifted his horse's reins, but Nash spat in the dirt. "She's a curse, and if you protect her, then you are too." Then he raised his rifle. The shot rang first from Eli's barrel. Not into flesh, into flame. The torch Nash held flew from his grip and landed in the snowbank, hissing out like a breath. The silence afterward was louder than the gun. "You come back," Eli said. "You don't get a warning." The riders stared. Then, one by one, they turned their horses and left. Only ash remained, curling in the wind. Inside, Isaiah still trembled beneath the cot. Mara knelt beside him and whispered something soft, something Eli didn't catch. The boy fell asleep soon after, clutching her braid like a child with a rope out of drowning. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, cleaning the rifle slow, remembering things he hadn't let himself recall in years. The war, the way men change when fear feeds them. How fast mercy dries up when something doesn't fit inside their church or their gut. Mara joined him at dawn. She didn't sit. She stood at the threshold, backlit by gray morning, hair unbound and eyes unreadable. "They'll come again," she said. "I know. With more men and fire." He didn't nod, didn't speak, just looked at her and knew it to be true. "I won't run," she said. "I won't ask you to." Something passed between them then, thicker than promise, colder than trust. An agreement forged in smoke, neither would break. Over the next weeks, Mara dug deeper into the earth, not just for herbs now, but roots with strange names. She boiled things Eli didn't recognize, crushed stones into dust, melted wax into black candles. She stitched charms into the seams of his coat. He let her. The mountain changed, birds flew low. The wind came from the north even when it shouldn't. At night, the trees creaked like they were speaking to one another. The forest grew denser, hungrier. People stayed away. But the boy, Isaiah, stayed. He fetched wood, learned to snare rabbits. He followed Eli like a shadow and Mara like a priestess. He didn't speak of his old life, not his father, not his mother, not the men who'd struck him across the face. But he smiled now sometimes when the sun hit the garden just right. One morning in September, Mara held her hand to Eli's chest. "I need something," she said. He waited. "I need what you don't speak of, what's buried deepest." He didn't answer. "I can't protect you unless I know what haunts you." He stepped back. She let him. That night he took the old box down from the rafter. Inside was a baby's bonnet. White, still soft, stained with something darker than age. He handed it to her. "My daughter never cried," he said. "She came too early. My wife bled too long. I buried them both under a cedar stump behind this house. I haven't said her name since." Mara took the bonnet, held it against her chest. "She cries now," she said. "At night, you just don't hear her." The wind howled against the windows. "You hear her?" Eli asked. "I hear everything this mountain tries to forget." He didn't speak again that night. He just sat with the fire, listening harder than he ever had before. The second coming didn't wait for snow. It came on a Sunday near the end of October. A dozen riders this time, some with badges, others with bottles. Preacher Kane at the front, white-haired and sunburnt, holding a Bible like a branding iron. "She is poison," the preacher said. "She brings rot, she makes the forest turn. She tempts our boys and withers our women. She is a daughter of the old devil himself." Eli stood alone at the edge of the path, rifle slung, but hands empty. "You can burn the trees," he said. "They'll grow back." Kane raised a fist. "Where is she?" "Gone." It was a lie, but he said it steady. The preacher didn't blink. We'll see about that. They marched past him, up toward the cabin. But what waited was not what they thought. The cabin was empty. But the garden, untouched for days, now brimmed with red blossoms, tall as a man's chest, humming with wasps. The roots bled when stepped on. Two of the men screamed. One fell, the rest fled. The preacher stayed. Mara stepped from the woods. She wasn't hiding. She wore a cloak of pine needles, hair thick with ash. Her eyes were black from smoke, and the charm around her neck glowed faintly in the dusk. She walked past Eli like wind past a fence post. She stood before the preacher without blinking. "I'm not the devil," she said, "but I remember him. Cain raised his Bible. You are unclean. So is every seed until it breaks." He swung the book. She didn't move. And he screamed. Something unseen struck him, flung him back 10 feet into the dirt. He clawed at the soil like it burned. Eli watched, unmoving, as Mara walked to the preacher and laid a single hand on his chest. "You'll live," she said, "but you won't speak again." And he never did. The rest ran, they didn't return. That night, Isaiah asked if she really was a witch. She knelt beside him, smoothed his hair. "I was a woman once," she said. "Then I became a girl, then I became a ghost, and now I'm something else." Eli sat in the doorway, listening. "What are you now?" the boy asked. She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. "I'm the part that doesn't die." Later, when the house was quiet, she came to Eli's bed. Not to lie with him, not yet, but to place her hand on his chest. "I held your miracle," she said, "that day at the butcher." He stared at her. "You thought I was just a girl," she said, "but you'd lost too much to see it." "What did I lose?" She looked at him with eyes that had buried cities. "Your faith in mercy." And with that, she turned and left the room. Eli lay there for hours, listening to the silence. But this time, beneath it, he heard something else. A child's breath, soft, steady. Crying, finally, in the roots of the mountain. The first frost came harder than expected, blades of ice creeping through cracks in the window panes, a silence so deep even the pines seemed to hunch their shoulders. By November, the sky turned the color of iron and stayed that way. The mountain held its breath. Mara didn't sleep most nights. She wandered the tree line instead, barefoot in the snow, trailing ash from her fingertips like someone marking a boundary even ghosts would cross. Eli watched her from the porch, a mug of spruce tea cooling in his hands, knowing better than to follow. Whatever she was shaping out, there wasn't meant for men. The garden had gone black, not dead, just withdrawn. The red blossoms twisted inward, their petals curled like fists. Every herb she'd planted had vanished beneath the frost, yet the soil remained warm to the touch. Isaiah once pressed his palm to it and said it felt like a heartbeat. The boy was changing, too. His limbs grew longer, sharper at the edges. His voice cracked when he laughed. He carved symbols into pine bark, not out of fear but memory, as if something inside him remembered what it meant to mark the world. Mara taught him without speaking, just gestures, glances, long silences broken by sudden truths. Eli started sleeping with one eye open. Not from distrust, from awe. He'd lived too long in the quiet to mistake it for peace. And what filled the air now was the stillness before a firestorm. Word drifted up from the valley, through trappers, travelers, and the occasional drunk who stumbled too far from town. They said dry pine was splitting, that the preacher's silence drove some mad and others grateful. Half the town now feared Mara, the other half wanted her. Some called her a saint, others something worse. But all agreed on one thing: things weren't dying right anymore. Bodies wouldn't stay cold, graves sank overnight, trees flowered out of season. A girl with a crushed spine woke up screaming in the dead of night, then walked straight into the river and vanished. Mara said little of it. Eli pressed her once, asking if she was the cause or the cure. She looked him full in the face and said, "Does it matter?" The night the first storm hit, she woke screaming. Eli sat up in bed, shotgun already in hand, but it wasn't an attack. It was a memory, flayed open in her mind like a deer carcass. She staggered from her bed, vomited blood into the hearth, and said one word. Lorne. The name meant nothing to him, but she fell to her knees whispering it like prayer, like a blade dragged across a raw nerve. Eli didn't touch her. He waited. When the fit passed, she looked at him. Her face was ash pale, her lips cracked from the cold. "My stepfather," she said, "the man who sold me." He nodded once. "He's not done." Isaiah had come to the doorway by then, a blanket around his shoulders, the dog pressed close. "He's coming?" the boy asked. "No," Mara said, "he's summoning." Eli felt the room tilt. "I buried that man," Mara went on. "3 years ago, saw the flies fill his mouth. But death doesn't hold men like him, not when blood is still owed." She rose shakily to her feet. Her hand left a red smear on the floor. Isaiah turned to Eli. "What does she mean?" But Eli already knew. Some debts rot, others bloom. Over the next week, Mara moved through the woods as if weaving something larger than her body. She scattered ash at crossroads, hung bones from trees, burned hair, bark, teeth. At night, she muttered in languages older than scripture. She no longer slept, neither did the birds. Then one dawn, she stopped. "I need you to come with me," she told Eli. She didn't say where, she didn't explain. He went. They hiked 6 miles east, past the buried ox trail and the burned-out cabin with the charred cradle still hanging from its rafters. Past where trees bent toward each other like whispering men. She walked until the air thinned, until even the dog refused to follow. Then she stopped at a grove of white pines grown in a perfect circle. "This is where I was made," she said. Eli looked around. "You were born here." "No, born in a kitchen like most, but made here, the day Lorne tried to break me." She knelt and placed her hands in the snow. "He dragged me here after I ran, said I owed him for the roof, the food, the silence. He beat me until my teeth broke. Then he left me, thought the cold would finish what he started." Eli watched her hands glow faintly beneath the frost. "But the forest took me in. The roots drank my blood, and something old offered me a choice." She looked up at him. "Die or change?" He didn't speak. "I changed," she said. And with that, she reached into the soil and pulled something out. It looked like a stone but pulsed faintly in her hand, gray as moonlight, wet as birth. "What is it?" Eli asked. "My heart," she said, "the one he couldn't kill." She handed it to him. It was warm. "Keep it," she said. "If I fall, plant it." He stared at her. "That's not a metaphor." "No," she said, "it's a seed." That night the air turned black. Not dark black. Like light itself had been drowned. Isaiah clung to the dog. Eli barred the doors. The cabin groaned, shutters shaking. Then, without sound, the windows shattered inward. Mara didn't flinch. She stepped outside, barefoot in snow, her braid unraveling in the wind. And across the clearing, through the blackened pines, came something that walked like a man but stank of oil and rot. Lorne. No longer flesh, no longer buried. His face was swollen, his mouth a cave. His eyes were empty sockets that leaked something thicker than shadow. He wore the same belt he'd used to strike her back, only now it moved like it breathed. "Mara," it rasped. She didn't answer. "You owe me." Eli stepped beside her, the heartstone still in his pocket. "She owes no one," he said. But Lorne laughed. "I took her first," he croaked, "and what's taken must return." Isaiah screamed as the air turned to ash. The ground cracked, roots bled, the sky trembled. But Mara only smiled. "You took nothing," she said. "You fed me." And then she raised her hands, and the mountain shook. Trees bent low, snow lifted off the ground like smoke. The bones in the garden rose and sang. Light split the darkness, not bright but deep, like the sun buried under the soil, waking. Lorne howled and began to burn. Not fire, something worse, truth. The shape of what he'd done. Mara screamed with him, not in pain but fury, and the sound sent crows spilling from the woods in every direction. By the time Eli could see again, Lorne was gone. Only a scorch mark remained, and in its center something small and alive. A sprout. Mara collapsed. Isaiah ran to her, shaking. Eli knelt. Her chest was still, but her hands gripped soil. "She gave it all," Eli whispered. But the boy looked at the sprout. "No," he said, "she planted it." And as dawn broke, the sky bled red across the snow. Spring thawed slow that year, dragging its heels across the ridgelines, pulling ice from the riverbed like old splinters from skin. Snow clung stubborn to the north face of the slopes while the rest of the world began to green. But around the cabin, where ash once blanketed the ground, life burst up too fast. The garden bloomed before the snow was even gone. Not just herbs now, but things no one had planted, blossoms with petals like feathers, vines that pulsed faintly at night, tall stalks that hummed when touched. The sprout that had grown from Lorne's scorch mark doubled in size each day. By the end of a week, it was a sapling. By the second, a tree. Its bark was the color of old blood. Its leaves were silver and sharp. When Isaiah sat beneath it, his bruises faded faster. His dreams stopped shaking him awake. Mara didn't wake. She lay inside, pale and still, breath shallow but steady. No wounds, no fever, just absence. Her body had gone quiet like earth in winter, waiting for something deeper than time. Eli fed her broth and spoke to her in the dark, not with words mostly, just his presence, his hands, his stillness, the way he watched the door as though death might come knocking again. Isaiah kept a fire burning every night, gathering wood until his fingers cracked. Neither of them said what they feared most: that she wouldn't return. Weeks passed. Then one dusk, when the sun bled low and the wind smelled of turned soil, she opened her eyes. No gasp, no startle, just breath. "I dreamed of roots," she said. Eli dropped the cup he'd been holding. "I dreamed of her," Mara whispered. "Who?" "Our daughter." And for the first time since her fall, she smiled. She was laughing. That night they lit no fire. The warmth of the earth held them. Mara sat beneath the new tree and placed her palm against its bark. She didn't speak, but her shoulders eased. Something in her had come back different, slower, deeper, like water beneath frozen lake skin. She looked older, not in years, but in weight. Eli sat beside her. "You were gone for a month." She nodded. "Where?" "I was underneath." He didn't ask what that meant. But Isaiah did. "Is it where the dead go?" Mara reached for the boy's hand. "It's where the truth goes," when no one else wants it. They spent that spring rebuilding, not the cabin it had stood, but the space around it. Mara cleared a ring around the miracle tree and planted no herbs, no crops, just stones. Black ones, white ones etched with ash and char. A memory circle, she called it. For every woman lost who was never named. Isaiah added one for his mother, then one for someone else. He didn't say who, he didn't need to. News from Dry Pine came slower now, and when it did, it came with silence behind it. The town no longer sent riders. They no longer whispered her name like a curse. Something in them had bent or broken. Cain, the preacher, had vanished, walked into the woods one night and never returned. Some said wolves got him. Others said he went looking for Mara's tree and saw something that made him forget how to come back. Either way, the fear faded. But not the hunger. By midsummer, a woman came up the ridge. Alone, middle-aged, weather-bitten hands. She stood at the edge of the clearing and called out in a voice that cracked with old sorrow. "I have a son who won't wake. They say you know how to help." Mara stepped out from the shade. "I do." The woman left with a vial of bark water and a charm stitched from hawk feather. She returned 2 weeks later with a basket of potatoes and tears in her eyes. More came after. A widower with lungs full of coal dust. A girl who hadn't spoken since her father drowned. A farmer whose animals bore twins with eyes too wide and too knowing. Mara took them one by one, never turned any away. She asked no coin, only story, only truth. "If you won't bleed for it," she told them, "you won't heal from it." And they bled with words, with confessions. The mountain drank it all. Eli kept the grounds, fished the river, watched her with a distance that wasn't fear but reverence. He loved her, but he knew better than to name it. Some love grows wild and dies when caged. Isaiah grew taller, stronger, smarter. He carved runes now that sparked when touched, drew maps in charcoal that changed when left overnight. The boy was no longer a boy, not in the way most men measured it. "You'll leave us one day," Mara told him. He didn't deny it. "But not yet," he said. Then the fire came. Not from man, but from earth. A dry summer, lightning, 3 strikes across the east ridge. Flames danced higher than the treetops. Ash swallowed the sky. The town was trapped, boxed between river and blaze. A runner came to the cabin, lungs full of smoke. "Please help us." Eli looked to Mara. She didn't move. "Let it burn," she said. The runner wept. "You've got gifts, powers. They say you saved a man with no pulse. You raised a girl who drank lie. You can call rain." "I could," she said. "Then why not?" She rose, walked to the edge of the clearing, looked east. "You let it burn when it was me," she said. "You let it burn when I screamed in the dark and you fed the man who did it. You let it burn for years." "That wasn't me," the runner whispered. "No," she said, "but you never asked." The man left empty. Eli stood in the doorway as smoke drifted like a curtain across the trees. "You'll let them die." "They already did," Mara said. That night the wind changed. Rain came, not soft but hard, hammering the roof like regret. The fire died, but so did most of the town. When the survivors came, thin and blackened with soot, they didn't ask for help. They knelt. Mara didn't bless them. She didn't forgive. She listened. And that, somehow, was worse. By autumn, Dry Pine had changed. No more preacher, no more riders, no more screaming girls left behind shops. They came to her now, all of them tired, broken, unmasked, and they planted trees. Every person healed left behind a seed, and the woods thickened with truth. But still, Mara didn't smile. One morning, as frost crept over the roots again, she sat by the miracle tree and placed her hand to the trunk. "She's ready," she said. Eli knew what she meant. Their daughter, the one who had never cried. Mara turned to him. "You've kept her long enough. It's time I held her." And that night, beneath the blood-colored leaves, she bled. It wasn't birth, it wasn't death, it was both. The miracle wasn't loud, it wasn't bright. It was a child born in silence who opened her eyes and saw everything that had been lost. A girl with hair the color of frost and skin like firelit clay. She didn't wail. She smiled. And the trees bowed. She was named Cedar for the tree that marked her grave before she lived and the one that bloomed the day her mother fell. They didn't call it resurrection. There were no psalms, no crosses burned in her name. It wasn't holy. It wasn't even clean, but it was true. And truth in Mara's hands grew teeth. Cedar didn't speak until she was 3, and when she did, her first word was return. Not mama, not papa, not dog or fire, but return, spoken into the soil while sitting barefoot in the snow. She'd been born with no breath, then taken her first one hours later while asleep in Mara's arms. Eli had watched, trembling, waiting for grief again, but instead came warmth. And so he stayed. They all did. Isaiah grew lean and golden, a man in sinew and shadow. He could read bird tracks like scripture, could tell when the wind was hiding something. At night he wrote things down, things Cedar whispered in her sleep or carved into bark without knowing why. When she touched the garden, plants that had never met sunlight twisted toward her fingers. When she cried, the well filled. By the time she was 4, Dry Pine had changed beyond recognition. The old church sat empty. Ivy thickened around the steeple until the bell tower collapsed. No one rebuilt it. Children played in the ruins and came home with stories about a girl of smoke who watched them from inside the broken cross. Nobody corrected them. Worship changed shape. Now they came to the mountain, not to kneel, not to beg, but to learn, and Mara taught them. How to speak to bone, how to hear sickness in the dirt, how to unmake things that were born wrong. Her price was never coin. She asked for old wounds spoken aloud, the kind buried under beds and behind teeth. When they told them, she listened like each word fed her roots. And sometimes she cried with them. Not often, but sometimes. Eli never left the ridge. He rebuilt the east wall of the cabin, added a second window so Mara could see the clearing from the table where she brewed her tonics. He fixed the porch board Cedar jumped from every morning. He never asked for more. Just sharpened tools, tended the dog's limp when it returned in the winter, and learned the rhythm of a house that had once been silence and now was breath. But peace never stays long in places that hold power. One evening, just after the last green leaf gave up to yellow, a rider came from beyond Dry Pine. Not local, not hungry for healing. A scout. He wore a blue sash pinned to a military coat and a revolver that gleamed like a sermon. He asked for water and was given it. He asked for direction and was denied it. He looked at Cedar and said, "Your child." Eli said yes. "She's not ordinary," the man said. "Neither are you," Mara replied. He left without finishing his drink. But a week later, 5 more came. Not soldiers, not yet, surveyors, mappers, men who spoke in numbers. They told of a new railroad plan to run through the valley. That Dry Pine was to be connected, that the ridge would need clearing. Mara didn't speak to them. Eli did. He asked where they'd come from. The lead man, a sharp-jawed Easterner with ink-stained fingers, named places Eli hadn't heard in 20 years. places with names like Walthorn and Dominion East and New Cedar Ridge. Too clean to be true. Eli asked how many trees they'd kill. The man laughed. All of them if needed. Forests don't feed cities, but railroads do. He was still laughing when the vines took his boot. They didn't kill him, not quite. But by the time he broke free, the others were gone, and the map he carried had turned to ash in his hand. He limped down the mountain, bleeding from his ears. And still the others came. By winter, a camp had been built 3 miles east of Dry Pine. Barracks, blacksmiths, horses penned in tight with barbed wire. They called it Forward Camp Jericho. They didn't speak of witches or miracles, just timber and steel. But they knew. Some nights they lit fires too large for warmth. Other nights they patrolled with dogs that wouldn't bark past the river. And on the coldest nights, men were heard screaming without cause. The forest changed again. Thicker, quieter. When Isaiah walked the edge of the ridge now, he wore ash on his face and carried blades that sang. He came back one morning with blood on his shirt. Eli asked whose it was. Isaiah didn't answer. Mara did. They cut down a cedar, one of hers. Eli looked to his daughter, who was sitting in the garden with her fingers buried elbow-deep in soil. She feels it, he asked. She is it, Mara said. Cedar looked up and smiled, but her teeth were changing, longer now, not monstrous, not cruel. Just honest. By the third winter, the trees stopped whispering. They listened instead. Mara stood one morning at the miracle tree, now 2 stories high and crowned with blossoms that never died. She wore no cloak. The wind cut her hair loose. She pressed her hand to the bark and closed her eyes. She's ready. Eli watched his daughter play in the snow, drawing patterns that moved when she walked away. Ready for what? He asked. To reclaim what was stolen. He stepped toward her. She's a child. She's not just a child, Mara said. She's the riverbed for what was drowned in us. Eli said nothing. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood too well. That night, Cedar walked in her sleep. She left the cabin barefoot, trailed by the dog and Isaiah. Mara didn't wake. Eli did. He followed them through frost so bright it gleamed like broken glass, through the thickest part of the woods where breath left your throat and never came back right. She led them to the first stump. The one where Eli had buried his wife, his daughter. Only it wasn't a stump now. It was a gate. The roots had grown outward, splitting the frozen ground in long spirals. In its center, the earth pulsed, not with life, not with death, but with memory. Cedar turned to Eli. You left her here, she said. He dropped to his knees. She died in my hands. She slept in yours, Cedar corrected, but she never left. And with that, she pressed her fingers to the roots and sang. It wasn't a song Eli knew. It wasn't even human. It was older, cracked and slow, like rock warming in spring. Isaiah knelt beside her, humming in harmony. The air thickened. When it ended, the frost around them had melted. And the stump had split open. Inside, curled in roots, was something small. Not a body. A shape. Not yet human, not yet beast, but beginning. Cedar smiled. She came back different. Eli's hands trembled. Will she wake? Mara's voice came from behind. She already has. They stood together, all of them, in the cold glow of a truth no grave had kept. Not family, not yet, but bound. And above them the forest swayed, not from wind, but waiting. The wind changed on the final day. Not a breeze, not a gale, something older, heavier, like the breath before a scream. It came down from the high ridges where no tracks held long, where the pines grew stunted and twisted and the clouds clawed the ground like dying hands. The fire would split wrong that morning. The dog refused meat. The air smelled of copper and thaw. Mara stood with her back to the cabin, eyes fixed north, palms open. "They're coming," she said. Eli knew who she meant. Forward Camp Jericho had grown teeth. Reports of men vanishing, of maps unraveling, of trees moving when backs were turned had reached the wrong kind of ears. Officers came, then scientists, then men in clean boots and long coats with faces that didn't belong to land. They didn't pray, they calculated. And they didn't ask this time, they declared. The ridge would be cleared, the land tested, the girl Cedar retrieved, alive or dead, a matter of state, a matter of science. They arrived at dawn with rifles, torches, wagons, 50 strong. They came with hounds, dynamite, the silence of decision already made. They marched in 3 lines. Isaiah saw them first. He didn't shout, he didn't run. He picked up the blade he had carved from blackwood and bone. The one Mara said sang only when death was true. He kissed Cedar's brow. "Stay with your roots," he whispered. Cedar nodded. She was 6 now, tall for her age, still quiet, still listening. Her hair had gone white in the last moon, not from age, not from fear, but from knowing. Her eyes held that same colorless depth Eli saw in the creek just before it froze. Eli loaded the rifle he hadn't used since Mara's first winter. "I won't let them take her." Mara looked at him. "They won't get the chance." The first shot cracked the mountain silence. A man fell, not by gun but by vine, lashed through the throat, dragged into brush that swallowed without echo. Then the forest screamed, not birds, not wolves. "The trees." Every branch bent toward the invaders, every trunk flexed. Roots surged from the soil, ripping the earth like parchment. Fire wouldn't catch. Hounds turned on handlers. The mountain came alive. But so did the men. They brought flame that hissed in rain. They brought noise that cracked stone. They had traps, wires, gas that glowed blue and spread in silence. Isaiah fell once, shoulder grazed, but rose before breath left him. Mara carved runes into her palms and pressed them to the soil. Blood soaked the ground. Still they came. The captain reached the clearing before dusk. Clean boots, pressed coat, spectacles that didn't fog. He stepped over the bones of 2 men who hadn't understood the silence and into the ring of miracle trees. Cedar stood in the center. She didn't flinch. He raised a strange weapon. Smooth, silver, humming with something like heat, but not. "You don't belong," he said. She tilted her head. "I was born here. You're a danger. I'm an answer. You're an anomaly. I'm the cost." And then she walked to him, slowly, barefoot. The captain lifted the weapon. Cedar lifted her hand. And the man dropped to his knees, screaming without sound. Blood spilled from his eyes. His skin cracked. He began to split, not torn but unfolded, like something hidden was being shown. Then he was gone. Ash where bone should have been. The rest broke, ran, screamed into trees that didn't let them pass. And by nightfall, the ridge was quiet again. Eli found Isaiah slumped against a cedar, arm bound tight. He was alive, just weary. Mara stood barefoot in the snow, watching the stars. "She did it," Eli said. Mara didn't smile. "She became it." Cedar didn't come back right away. She stayed in the garden in the center of the circle. The miracle tree had grown taller still, its roots coiled around the bones of the first grave. Light hummed faint from its bark. She didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't blink for 2 full days. Then, as the third dawn broke, she walked into the cabin and asked for stew. Life returned like moss after fire, quiet, slow, sure. Dry pine didn't rebuild, it didn't vanish either, it adapted. New people came, but no one cut trees now without asking aloud. No one raised hand to daughter, wife, or stranger without consequence. There was no law, just memory, and memory held tighter than rope. Mara aged, her braid turned silver, her hands stayed steady. She spent hours walking the circle, her fingers brushing each stone, each name, some she'd never met. Some had never lived long enough to earn a story, but they were remembered. Eli built a bench beneath the miracle tree, sat there often, sometimes with Mara, sometimes with Cedar. Once alone, the day his lungs failed, he didn't cry, he didn't shake, just leaned back, closed his eyes, and became soil. Mara buried him beside the roots. Cedar carved his name into bark. Years passed. Isaiah built a second home on the ridge for wanderers, not a chapel, not a school, just a place for those halfway between broken and mended. He never married, he never left. They said his blade still hummed if a liar stepped too close. And Cedar, she grew into a girl who smiled slow and honest, into a woman who sang in languages the air itself bent to hear, into something more. They didn't call her a witch, or a prophet, or a child of vengeance. They called her root daughter. And when mothers birthed still and broken, they carried them to her. When the dead wouldn't rest, they asked her to listen. When the earth cracked from too much silence, they gave her blood and asked her to forgive. She didn't always say yes, but she always answered. And the miracle tree grew. Even in snow, even in fire, even after